Hello and welcome back to another episode of FM Predict. In this episode, we are going to be taking a look at who FM thinks should be the next Celtic manager. Obviously, as you can see here, Ange Postecoglou has moved on to Spurs. If you want to see how FM thinks he's going to do at Spurs, I did a video on that. You can click the link above and then come back to this video or have a look at it afterwards. Completely up to you. But yes, we've got 5 managers that we've chosen, the top 5 favourites at time of recording for the Celtic job. And then we've let the game choose a lucky dip pick as well. So basically, we just moved Postecoglou to Spurs and then advanced a few seasons, saw who took charge of Celtic in the game naturally. And we'll see who that is at the end of the episode. So stay tuned for that. So how we're going to do this is we're going to take a look at each manager individually, see how long they last at Celtic, see how successful they are. And then at the end of the video, we will see who overall is the most successful and therefore who Celtic should hire as their next manager. Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below on who you think the next Celtic manager will be, who you think it should be, and if you think the game has got it completely wrong, like some of you may have thought with the Postecoglou video, or whether you think it's got it spot on and that manager would be very successful or not so successful, depending on who and how successful they were in this video. But we are going to kick things off with Enzo Maresca, the current favourite for the role according to Sky Bet. He is currently a coach at Man City, so at time of recording is helping Pep prepare the City side for the Champions League final. But there's heavy rumours that he could be the next man to take charge of Celtic. He does have previous managerial experience. He managed Parma for a short period of time, but nothing too major. So Celtic would be his first major job. Obviously, learning from Pep Guardiola is going to have given him a pretty good standpoint to start his managerial career properly from. So we've advanced to the end of the 23-24 season and Enzo is still manager of Celtic, which is a good starting point. So let's see how he's done with them. We'll first take a look at their transfers that they've made. And he was a very busy boy indeed in the first transfer window that he had in charge of Celtic. He brought in Tomoki Iwata from Gurari Yokohama, which I think is one of Postecoglou's former clubs. So that could actually be a transfer that's set up to happen in real life. If that is the case, please let me know if you're in the know in the comment section down below. Mohamed El Neni signed from Arsenal on a free. Lots of free transfers actually. He's got Axel Tuanzebe from Man United, Javier Simmons from Chelsea, Almami Toure has been brought in from Frankfurt, a loan from Arsenal, Marcelo Flores, and then actually spending some money as well on Sivert Mannsverk from Molde in Norway, is that? Looks a pretty decent player. Talis Magno for 11 million from New York City, again a very decent player brought in there. Wouter Berger on loan from Manchester United, and Jan Couto on loan from his former club, of course, Manchester City. Sebastian Vegas brought in from Monterrey for £5 and a bit million, and Juan Bernat brought in from PSG. Very decent incomings there for Enzo in his first season in charge of Celtic. So we'll take a look at each competition individually in his first season in charge. So the Premier Sports Cup, which I believe is the Scottish League Cup, that was won by Celtic. They beat Ross County in the final, beating Motherwell, Aberdeen and Livingston on the way there. So his first piece of silverware picked up at the end of December, just in time for Christmas. And Celtic would make it a domestic double by beating Ayr in the Scottish Cup final as well, beating Forfar, Ross County Hearts and Rangers on the way to the final. In the Champions League, however, things would not go their way. They did pick up a couple of points, but they had a pretty difficult group, I'd say. PSG, Benfica and PSV in their group. They couldn't even finish third to qualify for the Europa League, ending up bottom of the group, drawing with Celtic, losing 3-0 to PSG, losing 4-0 to Benfica, losing 2-0 to Benfica in the return game, losing 2-0 to PSG in the other return game, and drawing against PSV 1-1 again. So the 2 draws coming against PSV and Celtic knocked out of Europe. But then in the Scottish Premiership, he only went and won the title again, finishing 8 points clear of second place Rangers, losing just 3 games all season, drawing 6 and winning 29. A pretty decent first season in charge then, all in all, for Enzo Maresca. He's won the treble, as Ange has done in real life. So just continuing where Postecoglou left off. So these are the transfers that Enzo made in his second season in charge of Celtic. So a free transfer brought in from Arsenal. Don't really know him. You can see all the names there. He's raided his former club Man City for Ivan Ilic and Filip Stefanovic on loans. Well, Ilic was a loan originally, and then he signed permanently for 15.25 million at the end of the season. James Justin brought in on loan and then signed permanently at the end of the season for 24 million as well. A player from Al Ain and a player from Dinamo Zagreb as well. Things haven't gone the way that you maybe would have expected. Knocked out of the Premier Sports Cup at the second round by Hibernian by 2-1. So there's a trophy that Celtic aren't going to have won this season. And then in the Scottish Cup, they got knocked out at the semi-final stage. They got revenge on Hibernian in the quarter-final, beating Cove Rangers and Kilmarnock on the way to the semis too, but St Johnstone beating them after a 0-0 draw on penalties to knock Celtic out of both cup competitions. And then in the Champions League, it was of course a new format, the league phase, and Celtic got a pretty tough draw of games, to be honest, drawing 2 of their 8 games against Monaco and LASK, but losing against Spurs, managed by Postecoglou still, Barca, Inter, Milan, PSG and Benfica to finish bottom of the league phase. So all hopes for Enzo are resting on his results in the Scottish Premiership for this season. And he won the Scottish Premiership, 12 points clear of Rangers in second. At least he's got another trophy in the bag, so that's 4 trophies in 2 seasons. Pretty good going. Obviously, Celtic fans have come to expect that they would win the domestic cups as well, so maybe a slight disappointment to not do that. But let's see how he does in his 3rd season. And we can see here that he is actually no longer manager of Celtic. Erik ten Hag, obviously current Man United manager, is now manager of Celtic. I'm assuming he was sacked by Manchester United because he left them in 2024 and didn't take charge of Celtic till 2025. But what has happened to Enzo Maresca? Well, he's done a Brendan Rodgers. He's copied Brendan Rodgers. He's had a bit of success at Celtic and he's moved on to Leicester. But, oh no, yeah. I was going to say, but he left at the end of this season that's just finished. He didn't. He left at before the 25-26 season even started. So that is it for Enzo Maresca's time in charge of Celtic. 2 full seasons, 4 trophies, 1 obviously 2 times Scottish Premiership winner and 1 time Scottish Cup and Scottish League Cup winner. And speaking of Brendan Rodgers, let's see how he does next. So rumours abound that he could possibly be making a return to Celtic. I've heard rumours that he's even bought a flat in Glasgow, which is a bit odd considering I'm pretty sure he got death threats when he left for the Leicester job originally back in 2019. But let's see how Brendan does in his 2nd stint in charge of Celtic. So in Brendan Rodgers' 1st season back in charge of Celtic, he has been very busy indeed. £43.5 million spent. He has made some similar signings to Enzo Maresca. Tamaki Owata, I'm going to say for certain that is a signing that was already pre-confirmed. Mohamed El Neni, Axel Tuanzebe, they were brought in by Maresca as well. They've been brought in on frees by Brendan Rodgers, but he's also raided Arsenal for Miguel Aziz, Marcelo Flores and Brooke Norton-Cuffy, as well as Tyler Morton on loan from Liverpool. They've signed Sean Longstaff on loan from Newcastle, a player brought in on loan from Dortmund as well, Julian Ryerson, not really aware of him. Rudi Ballatore, who I'm well aware of from a Milan save, that had a pretty decent left back, brought in for just £1.8 million. Brought in Gustavo Scarpa from Nottingham Forest, David von Balmus from Young Boys, Sean Longstaff eventually signing on a permanent deal from Newcastle for £4.8 million as well, so obviously must have impressed Brendan in his loan spell. So we'll kick things off with the Premier Sports Cup, and he has not made it to a final. He's not even made it to a semi-final. He's got knocked out at the quarter-final stage to Inverness by 1-0. They beat St Johnstone in the 2nd round, but that is not as good as Enzo Maresca did in his 1st season in charge. Well, then in the Scottish Cup, he has equalled what Enzo did. He's beat Berwick, St Johnstone, Morton, Rangers and then Hearts in the final to claim a 1st trophy in his 2nd spell as manager of Celtic. In the Champions League, though, things didn't go well. In a group of death, really. Napoli, Man United and Real Madrid, that is not a group that you want in the Champions League. Doing well to draw their 1st game by 2-2 against Napoli at home, but then losing 1-0 to Man United, 5-0 to Real Madrid, losing 2-0 at home to Real Madrid, 3-2 at home to Man United, and then 2-0 away to Napoli. I'm pretty sure that's going to mean they were bottom. Yes, they were bottom of that group, and that is what you would expect. That is a horrific draw in the Champions League for Celtic. And then in the league, he didn't even win the title. Rangers winning the title, 3 points clear of Celtic. Brendan Rodgers has had a stinker in his first season in charge. 1 trophy won, and it wasn't even the league title. The Scottish Cup is the only trophy to his name. How is he still in charge? Surely Celtic fans would be baying for blood if he didn't win the league for them in his first season in charge. Taking a look at his transfers in the second season, he's brought in Ethan Ampadu on a free transfer even from Chelsea. Someone from Varzim, don't really know him. Julian Arau on loan from Barcelona, then signed permanently at the end of the season. Taiwo Awoniyi on loan from Forest, and then signed permanently at the end of the season. And Ruben Vargas signed on loan from West Ham, and you can guess how that sentence is going to finish. Yes, signed permanently at the end of the season. So how has he done in his second season? Well, he did a bit better in this Premier Sports Cup compared to his first season, making it all the way to the final, but defeated by Hearts, the team that they beat in the Scottish Cup final the previous season, beating Morton, Stirling and Dundee United on the way to the final. So it's a bit of progress in that competition, at least from Brendan. In the Scottish Cup, he retained the Scottish Cup with a 4-0 win in the final over Motherwell, beating Rothes, St Mirren, Montrose and Aberdeen en route to that final. In the Champions League, because they finished second, they had to go through qualifying and they didn't make it through the first stage that they joined the competition at, losing to Rennes. They beat them 2-1 at home at Celtic Park, but couldn't hold Rennes back in France as Rennes went on and won 3-0, winning 4-2 on aggregate. That was a lot harder maths than it should have been. But of course, that meant that they dropped into the Europa League, and they had a pretty good Europa League run. So in the league phase, they lost to Hertha Berlin, bad start, but then beat Slavia Prague, LASK, Norrköping and Karabag, then drew to Red Star, lost to Aston Villa and beat Anderlecht to finish 8th. So they got in one of the top 8 places, which means they skipped the next knockout round and go straight through to the round of 16. Pretty good stuff from Brendan. And then in the knockout rounds, they were drawn against Ludogorets in the round of 16 and beat them quite comfortably by 4-1. They then got Rennes, the team that knocked them out of Champions League qualifying, in the quarter-final, and they got some sweet, sweet revenge, beating them on penalties after drawing the first leg 1-1 and the second leg 0-0. And then it was Aston Villa. They'd already played Aston Villa in the league phase. They'd lost 3-0 to them in the league phase. They lost 3-0 in the first leg and then lost 3-2 in the second leg. So only the semi-finals, but that is a pretty good run for Celtic. And now let's see if Brendan has managed to win the league. And he has 4 points clear from Rangers. Celtic are back at the top of Scottish football. So a pretty successful second season. His second season was definitely better than his first, winning the Scottish Cup and the league and making it all the way to a European semi-final. Very good stuff. Can he improve on that in his third season? Well, he's spent a bit of money again in his third season. He's brought in a couple of free transfers from Chelsea and Manchester United. He signed a Real Madrid player, Renier, for £1.3 million. Someone from Albacete, Javier Simons, he was signed by Enzo in his first season on a free transfer, pretty sure. He's been signed for 200k from Fulham. Kofi Kuau's coming from Metz. Rooney Bargi, who is a very, very good player. If you have watched my Milan save, you'll know all about him. He has been brought on loan from Arsenal. Firmino, Hakim Ziyech. Okay, there's some relatively big names coming in here. I mean, Firmino's at the end of his career, 34 years old. Ziyech, he's towards the end of his career as well, to be fair, but still big name signings for Celtic. And Miliro Bogard from Hoffenheim. If you know, you know. I don't. In terms of sales, a couple of big ones. Liel Abada moving to Spurs. Are Spurs still managed by Ange? They are. He's having a nice time of it in North London this time around. Good on you, Ange. £20.5 million Liel Abada sold to Spurs for, and then Talis Magno sold to Nottingham Forest for 20 million. So plenty of money back into the budget for Brendan to work with. So we'll kick things off as we always do with the Premier Sports Cup, and again it's been very unsuccessful for Celtic, beating Ayr 2-0 in the second round, but then losing to rivals Rangers 3-1 after extra time in the quarter-final. Still no success in that competition for Brendan Rodgers so far. But the Scottish Cup is where he is finding success, winning it again for the third season in a row. Brora Rangers, Motherwell, Dundee Rangers. I said that a bit too quick. We'll start again. Brora Rangers, Motherwell, Dundee, Rangers and Aberdeen all fell to the wayside as Celtic won the Scottish Cup once more. Now, in the Champions League, obviously Celtic qualifying directly into the league phase of the Champions League. They won their first game 2-1 against Sporting. Then they lost against Club Brugge, Villarreal and Chelsea before beating FC Copenhagen and Bayer Leverkusen, and then losing to Bayern and Monaco. And those results meant that they did actually qualify for the first knockout round of the Champions League for the first time since Brendan retook charge of the club, finishing 24th in the final qualifying spot. On goal difference. Is it on goal difference? It might even be on goals scored. No, they had identical... How's that been organised? They had identical goals scored and goals against compared to Benfica. But it looks like they won one more game than Benfica did. And that is how they qualified into the first knockout round. But then in the first knockout round, or in the knockout playoff round as it's called here, they were drawn against Napoli. They only lost narrowly 1-0 in the first leg at home. And then they managed a 1-1 draw in the second leg. So a pretty decent performance, even though they did get knocked out of the tournament. And then in the league, they won it again. 16 points clear of Rangers this time. So once again, Scottish Cup and Premiership champions. Another double for Brendan Rodgers at Celtic in his third season. So Brendan's finished his fourth season in charge of Celtic now. And these are the transfers he's made in that fourth season. So he's signed a few players from Arsenal for quite low fees. He's gone to Man City and signed Oscar Pereira for £7.75 million. Hirving Lozano, there's a name that stands out. He's been signed from PSG for £7.75 million, heading towards the latter end of his career, I would say, for Hirving, but still a decent signing. In terms of sales, I see it, there's 80 million worth of sales gone out. So Zé Carlos has gone to FC Porto for £17 million. Jota has gone to Newcastle for £40 million. And Ethan Ampadu has gone to Manchester United for £19.25 million. So a lot of sales once again, but not that many incomings, or at least not that many big signings of incomings. So we kick things off as always with the Premier Sports Cup, and unfortunately Celtic were knocked out in the second round, 3-0 defeat at the hands of Hearts, so still no Premier Sports Cup for Brendan. In the Scottish Cup though, he continues to win this, beating Hearts 3-0 in the final as they beat Wraith, Montrose, Dundee and Hibernian on the way to that final. In the Champions League, Celtic had to qualify from the Champions Path playoffs, and they did. They beat Maccabi Tel Aviv 5-0 over 2 legs, which meant they qualified for the league phase. They kicked things off with a 1-1 draw against Slavia Prague, then lost 3-0 to both Dortmund and Barcelona before beating Ajax by 2-0, then losing to Everton, Bayer Leverkusen and Man City before beating Monaco by 2-1. But those 2 wins and a draw were not enough, as Celtic finished 31st in the league phase of the Champions League. But they did win the league title once more, beating Rangers to the punch by 17 points this time. So yet another SPL title for Brendan Rodgers. And we get to the end of what would have been Brendan Rodgers' 5th season in charge of Celtic, but you can see there is a new man at the helm. Emre Belözoğlu, former Newcastle United player, is the manager of Celtic. So what has happened to Brendan? Oh dear, Brendan, that was not a good career move for you. He decided to up sticks and leave Celtic to join Newcastle. And it doesn't look like he's lasted very long at all at Newcastle. So he joined them in June 2027 and he left 152 days later on the 20th of November. He was sacked. In fact, he didn't leave. So that means he didn't really manage Celtic in the 27-28 season. So he only managed 4 seasons with Celtic. So over the course of 2 extra seasons compared to Enzo Maresca, Brendan managed 1 more SPL title and 3 more Scottish Cups. He made it out of the Champions League phase once and was a semi-finalist in the Europa League. So the next man to try the managerial position at Celtic is Des Buckingham, a relatively unknown manager who is quite high in the betting odds for the Celtic job. He is currently manager at Mumbai City in India, so let's see how he can do and if he can do any better than Brendan and Enzo have done so far. Well, we'll kick things off with his transfers, and he has not been shy about spending money. So he spent £44.5 million. He's brought in a few players on loan, Rico Lewis and Fabio Carvalho from Man City and Liverpool. Radic Krunic has been signed from Milan. Got Rasmus Christensen signed from Leeds for 14 million. Longstaff and Garnacho, as well as Marcus Tavernier, brought in on loan from Newcastle, Man United and Bournemouth. Sean Longstaff and Marcus Tavernier actually both eventually signing at the end of their loan deals. So we'll start things off with the Premier Sports Cup, and he has done one better than Brendan Rodgers ever did in his second stint in charge. And he's won the Premier Sports Cup, beating Kilmarnock, Rangers and Hearts on the way to the final, where they beat Arbroath by 2-0. Good on Arbroath for getting to a cup final, by the way. In the Scottish Cup, they beat Queen of the South, Kilmarnock, Dunfermline and Raith on the way to the final, but didn't have enough to beat Rangers in the final, losing by 1-0 with a very late Kemar Roof goal. And in the Champions League, it was a very difficult group of Barcelona, Lazio and Dortmund. They lost their first 2 games against Barcelona and Lazio, drew 1-1 against Dortmund at home, but then got smashed on the return fixture at Dortmund and lost to Lazio and Barcelona in the final 2 league games as well, finishing bottom of their group and therefore not even qualifying for the Europa League. But they did manage to win the league title. So is that a domestic double? They won the League Cup, didn't they? Yeah, they beat Arbroath in the League Cup, so that's a domestic double. So in his second season, he spent some more cash. He brought in quite a few players on free transfers. Sander Berger, probably the main one that I at least recognise from Sheffield United being brought in there. He brought in Nuno Tavares on loan from Arsenal and then signed him at the end of his loan deal. Mauro Icardi brought in for £13.5 million as well. He's surely got to be a bit old now. 32 years old, that's younger than I was expecting. And also signed a few other players from Sporting and Aston Villa. Joe Hart was sold to Hibernian for £210,000. And there's a lot of loans and smaller fees out as well. But let's take a look at how they did in their competitions in his second season. So there was no defence of the Premier Sports Cup as they were knocked out at the second round stage. Joe Hart even scoring in the penalty shootout against his former club. 0-0 after 90 minutes and possibly extra time. Not sure if they play extra time in this competition, but then it went to penalties and Hibs knocked them out. But then they did have some success in the Scottish Cup as they went on to win it, beating Morton, Motherwell, Hearts, Livingston on the way to the final, where they beat Dundee by 2-0. In the Champions League, of course, it's the league phase, and it started out with a 0-0 draw against Partizan and then a 3-0 victory over Shakhtar, but defeats to Atletico and Dortmund followed that, and then a 3-1 win over Antwerp was the final points of the league phase as they went on to lose to Salzburg, Manchester United and Milan. And where did they finish? They finished 28th in the league phase, 1 point off qualifying for the knockout rounds. But he did win the league title again, and this time by 20 points. So I think that's the highest gap between first and second that we've seen in this video so far. So Des Buckingham still doing it. He's got a domestic double once more, just a different cup this time. Well, we've come to what would be the end of Des Buckingham's third season in charge of Celtic, but there is a new manager in charge, Kjetil Knutsen, which is interesting because he is one of the managers that's yet to come in this video. So we'll come back to Kjetil. But what happened to Des? Well, he has moved on to become the Brighton manager. I think he's done it partway through the season as well. He's done it in January. He moved on to Brighton in January. So we do have part of this season to thank him for. So we'll see how Celtic were doing up until the point where he decided to leave for new pastures. So as always, we'll take a look at his transfers. So he's brought in Frank Onyeka from Bordeaux. Harry Maguire's been brought in on a free transfer as well. Calvin Ramsey on loan from Liverpool. Albert Sambi Lokonga on loan from Arsenal as well as a few other signings that I'm not really familiar with. In terms of sales, though, £77 million out is ridiculous. So Liel Abada has gone to Brighton. So Des has actually gone and joined him just a few months after he sold him. And Maxime Esteve has gone to Nice for £20.5 million. And Steffi Mavididi has gone to Brentford for £8.25 million. So how did Celtic do this season? Obviously, we can't give Des all the praise for this, but we'll see how they got on. Well, he actually won this tournament, so the Premier Sports Cup has been regained by Celtic, beating Inverness, Hibs and Hearts on the way to the final where they beat Rangers 3-1. So that is another trophy in the bag for Des. Scottish Cup, they got all the way to the final, but Des didn't have anything to do with it, so we can't count that. And in the Champions League, no wins in the league phase this time around. A 1-0 defeat to Bayern was followed up by two 1-1 draws against Marseille and Midtjylland before losing to Benfica, then drawing with Wolfsburg and losing to Monaco, Real Madrid and Arsenal, which meant that Celtic finished 32nd in the league phase, so a bit worse than last season. And then just out of interest, because it doesn't really count towards Des's trophy haul, Celtic did win the SPL once again. So we're halfway through all the managers that we're going to try out as Celtic manager, and I would have to say Brendan Rodgers looks like the best one so far, mainly for his Europa League run, getting them all the way to the semi-final. But we've still got 3 to go, so they might do a better job than Brendan. And the man that we're going to try out next is Kjetil Knutsen, obviously the man that replaced Des Buckingham in the last save that we tried out. And he has had some success with Bodo Glimt in Norway, 2-time Premier Division champion over there. And he was shortlisted, I believe, for the Celtic job before Ange Postecoglou got it. So this one has the potential to happen. So we'll see how he gets on at the end of his first season. So his signings for his first season, some of them are pretty similar to ones that we've seen previous managers make. So El Neni and Axel Tuanzebe and Javier Simmons brought in on free transfers. We've seen them before. Other standout names, really just Sean Longstaff brought in on loan and then signed permanently. He's another one that we've seen pop up a few times as well. So how have they done in the competitions? Well, Premier Sports Cup, that is in the bag. They beat Morton, Partick Thistle and Dundee United on the way to the final where they beat Rangers by 2-0. First trophy in the bag for Kjetil. In the Scottish Cup, they made it all the way to the final, beating Dundee United, Hibernian Rangers and Kilmarnock, but losing 2-1 to St Mirren in the end. In the Champions League, they had a pretty average group, I would say. They beat Dynamo Zagreb in their first group game, then lost to Benfica, beat Inter 3-2 at the San Siro. What a result that would have been. Then lost to Inter and Benfica before drawing their final game against Dynamo, and I believe that left them in 3rd place. They missed out on qualification for the knockout round because they lost both their games against Benfica. But of course, a 3rd place finish means that they qualified for the Europa League knockout rounds, and they came up against Olympiacos, beat them 3-1 over 2 legs in the knockout playoff round, but then got beat 4-0 by Liverpool in the round of 16. And then in the league, they won the league title, winning it by 11 points from Rangers in 2nd. So pretty decent first season for Kjetil. He's the first manager to have a decent run in the European competition in his first season as well, if I remember rightly. So £14 million spent in his 2nd season in charge of Celtic, and I'm not really sure of any of those players, but you can have a look at the names yourself if you recognise any of them. He sold Joe Hart on a free transfer to Fortuna Dusseldorf, and Aaron Moy's gone out to Cagliari for £2.5 million as well. In the Premier Sports Cup, they got knocked out at the semi-final. They beat Aberdeen and Rangers, but were defeated by Hart in the semi. But he did win the Scottish Cup, beating Queen of the South, Hamilton, Aberdeen and Dundee United on the way to the final where they beat Rangers by 2-1 after extra time. In the Champions League, obviously it's the league phase, and they kicked things off with a 3-0 defeat against Inter, who they obviously beat in European competition last season. They then beat Maccabi Haifa and FC Copenhagen before losing to Liverpool and Red Star Belgrade, beat AEK Athens, drew with Benfica and then got smashed by Man City, but qualified for the knockout playoff round as they finished 21st in the league phase. But in that knockout playoff round, they were drawn against Lyon and they succumbed to 2 1-0 defeats in both legs, meaning a 2-0 defeat, and they were knocked out of the Champions League. But in the league, it was another league title for Kjetil, 10 points clear of Rangers this time, and he seems to be able to do a pretty decent job in Europe as well as domestically. So that could swing things for him in terms of deciding who the best person to manage Celtic next is. So a lot of money spent in Kjetil's 3rd season in charge, £40.5 million spent overall. Nick Pope brought in from Newcastle for $6.25 million. Calvin Ramsey on loan from Liverpool, just picking out the ones that I know as always. Jay Stansfield as well. Exeter City loanee, I think. Jay Stansfield, he's been signed from Fulham for £3 million. In terms of sales as well, £67 million outgoings. Josip Sutalo has gone to Newcastle for £28 million. Leo Labada has gone to Newcastle as well for £27 million. He seems to get a big money move quite a lot of the time, we've noticed. So in the Premier Sports Cup, he's won it again, beating Hearts, Aberdeen and St Johnstone on the way to smashing Hibernian 3-1 in the final. He's made it a domestic cup double at the very least, as they beat Dundee United in the Scottish Cup final after knocking Airdrie, Hearts, St Mirren and Hamilton out. But he couldn't make it 3 seasons in a row of having a bit of a European journey, as they were knocked out of the Champions League at the league phase. They did get a draw against Copenhagen, a win over Olympiacos and another win over Inter, but defeats to Real Sociedad, Man City, Lazio, PSV and Arsenal meant that they didn't finish in a qualification spot, finishing 27th, missing out by a point to the last qualification spot. Rangers making it through, which I'm sure will not have pleased the Celtic fans. But one thing that will have pleased the Celtic fans is that he picked up yet another Scottish Premiership title, finishing 15 points ahead of Rangers. So season 4 for Kjetil in charge of Celtic. There's only £11.75 million spent this time round, so not spending as much money as previously. The biggest outlay was for Dauda Guindo from Red Bull Salzburg. Rico Lewis brought in on loan as well from Manchester City, and not any real massive outgoings either. Jay Stansfield obviously just signed the season before, I believe. He's gone off to Hibernian for £1.8 million. So Premier Sports Cup, they were knocked out at the quarter-final stage this time around, beating Inverness in the second round, but losing on penalties to Hamilton in the quarter-finals. No success in either of the domestic cup competitions this time around, as they were knocked out by Aberdeen on penalties after a 1-1 draw in the quarter-final. They'd beaten Queen of the South and Hamilton on the way to that. They did, however, get another run in the Champions League. They had to start off from the Champions Path playoff round. I'm guessing Scotland have lost coefficient ranking and therefore had to start at that stage. Red Star Belgrade were the team that they were drawn against, and they beat them 3-1 over 2 legs. They then went into the league phase, got an amazing draw against Barcelona 0-0, lost to Juve, beat Young Boys 1-0, lost to Porto, beat Shakhtar, beat Nice, lost to Liverpool and drew 1-1 with Leipzig, to mean that they finished 22nd in the league phase. And that meant that they got through to the knockout playoff round, but unfortunately they were drawn against Bayern and lost 3-0 over 2 legs. So again, Kjetil getting them to the latter stages of European competition. I'm sure Celtic fans would be very pleased to do that so often as he has as manager. And then he's done that as well as ensuring that they stick to their bread and butter of winning the Scottish Premiership as well, winning it this time by 10 points from Rangers. Now into his 5th season in charge, or the end of his 5th season in charge, and Thomas Lemar is the standout name here. £22.5 million from Crystal Palace is what they've paid for him. A few other players brought in. Christopher Clayson brought in from his former club Bodo Glimt as well, the goalkeeper, signed for £3.5 million. Ben Doak as well brought in on loan from Liverpool. In terms of outgoings, Jota has left to go to Liverpool for £34.5 million. Nick Pope's gone to Nottingham Forest for £4.5 million. El Nenny's away to Strasbourg. He must be towards the end of his career now. Yeah, he's 35 years old. Now this will be the last season that we look at Kjetil Knutsen. He's been there for 5 seasons. That's enough. I think he could be there for a very long time to come, to be quite honest, with the way that he's going. But the Premier Sports Cup was not a success this time round, losing out to St Johnstone in the semi-final after extra time, after knocking out Dundee United and Aberdeen. No success in the Scottish Cup either, beating East Kilbride, Livingston and Hamilton, but losing out after extra time once more to Aberdeen in the semi-final. And in the Champions League, Celtic had to qualify from the Champions Path playoff once again. They did that. They beat AIK by 4-1. And then in the league phase, they drew with Dortmund, lost to Sporting, Club Brugge and Villarreal, beat Salzburg and Levski, but lost to Milan, very narrowly to Milan, and narrowly to Liverpool as well, which meant that they finished 27th in the league phase, 1 point off qualification for the knockout rounds. But he did win the Scottish Premiership once more, 6 points clear of Rangers. So that's 5 seasons in the bag for Kjetil Knutsen. Definitely the longest lasting of the Celtic managers so far. He's picked up 5 league titles, 4 cup wins, and made it into the knockout rounds of the Champions League twice in his 5 seasons. I think that means he takes the lead over Brendan Rodgers now. So our penultimate manager to look at is a Celtic fan, a man that has just won the Europa Conference League with West Ham. It's David Moyes. Can he bring success to Celtic towards the end of his career? It could possibly be the last job that he has in football. Let's take a look at his transfers for his first season. And again, it's some familiar names there. Axel Tuanzebe, Javier Simons as well. He's brought in one player from Cruz Azul. Quite a lot of free transfers, actually. Seth Vandenberg brought in on loan from Liverpool. Frank Onyeka brought in on loan from Brentford as well. Ryan Sessegnon signed for 10.75 million from Tottenham. Levi Colwill, who of course was on loan at Brighton this past season, brought in on loan as well. And then Frank Onyeka actually signed permanently from Brentford at the end of the season. So in the Premier Sports Cup, they were knocked out in the second round to Inverness by 2-1. Made it all the way to the Scottish Cup final, beating Aberdeen, Falkirk, St Johnstone and Ross County on the way, but lost after a 1-1 draw on penalties to Rangers. In the Champions League, they were drawn against Club Brugge, Real Madrid and Benfica. Really, they should be finishing third in that group, I would say. They should be finishing ahead of Club Brugge, but they lost to Club Brugge in the opening day, lost to Benfica and Real Madrid, then drew 1-1 with Benfica at home, but lost to Real Madrid and drew 1-1 with Club Brugge and finished bottom of the group by 5 points. But then in the league, he did manage to win that at least, 12 points clear of Rangers in second. And we've come to what would have been his second season in charge, and Neil Lennon is back as Celtic manager. So what has happened? What has happened to David Moyes? Has he retired? He resigned at the end of last season. So David Moyes spent one season with Celtic. Maybe he's retired. Has he retired? Has he gone somewhere else? He's managing Austria. That's a very odd decision from. Okay. So he's gone to what I believe to be his club, Celtic, and had a season, won the league title, and then decided, nah, it's not for me. You're going to go and manage Austria. Strange decision, David, but you do you. So that's got to be the worst performance from a manager so far in this video. But we've got one more manager to look at, and this is the lucky dip. It's the one where I just let the game decide who would take up the vacant manager role at Celtic after Postecoglou went to Spurs. So who has the game picked? It's only gone and picked former Southampton manager Ralph Hasenhüttl as Celtic manager. So let's see how he's got on in his first season. So in terms of signings, we've got Levi Colwill coming in on loan from Chelsea. Rico Lewis from Man City as well. Dr. Fofana from Chelsea is another pretty decent loanee. A bit of a shock one there. Scott McTominay signed on loan from Man United in the January transfer window. And then Ellis Sims, who was on loan at Sunderland in real life for part of last season, he's been signed permanently from Everton. And Ralph Hasenhüttl, he's done better than David Moyes in the Premier Sports Cup at the very least, beating Ross County Rangers and Arbroath on the way to the final where they beat St Mirren. Only making it to the quarter-final of the Scottish Cup though, beating St Johnstone and Cove Rangers before losing narrowly to Rangers. A very tough group in the Champions League basically meant it was impossible for them to qualify, as they lost to Napoli, Man United, PSG twice, and then drew with Man United and Napoli. Those two results are something to be pleased at, I guess, but they finished bottom of that group. But then they did, of course, go on to win the Scottish Premiership by 7 points from Rangers. So a pretty decent start from Ralph Hasenhüttl. And we've come to what would have been Ralph's second season in charge, or the end of his second season in charge. And Neil Lennon has become manager yet again. What is it with Neil Lennon just wanting to return to Celtic? So Hasenhüttl actually resigned at the end of his first season as well. So both David Moyes and Hasenhüttl both just having the one season at Celtic. Has he gone? He's gone to Austria as well. He's gone to Austria. Why is everyone going from Celtic to Austria? First David Moyes, now Hasenhüttl. Is there something about the Austrian national team that I'm not aware of? So Hasenhüttl, he's done better than Moyes, but can't really put him any higher than 5th in the list. So we'll do a quick rundown now of the rankings of the 6 managers that we've gone through to possibly be Celtic's next manager, and then we'll see who, I think you already know, who FM thinks should be the next Celtic manager. So bottom of the rankings, we've obviously got David Moyes, 1 SPL title, 1 season, and then he's left to go to Austria. Not great, is it? 5th place, we've got Ralph Hasenhüttl, left to go to Austria as well, but he won 2 trophies in his one and only season. The only reason he's above Moyes. So 4th, we've got Enzo Maresca. He only spent 2 seasons as manager of Celtic. He won the league title twice. He won a Scottish Cup. He won a League Cup. No progression in the European competitions. Then in 3rd, we've got Des Buckingham. A pretty similar journey to Enzo Maresca. He had 2.5 seasons in charge though. And the only reason he's above Maresca is because he won 1 extra League Cup. So he won 2 league titles, 2 League Cups and a Scottish Cup. In 2nd, and he was leading for the first part of this video, is Brendan Rodgers. So he spent 4 seasons in his second spell with Celtic before making the odd decision to move to Newcastle and then got sacked after a very short period of time. But in his time at Celtic for the second time, he won 3 league titles and 4 Scottish Cups, got out of the league phase of the Champions League once, and also made Celtic Europa League semi-finalists. Which means that Football Manager thinks the man that should be the next manager of Celtic is Bodo Glimt manager Kjetil Knutsen. So he spent 5 seasons at Celtic, and he was doing so well that I just decided to stop at 5 seasons. He could have gone on to manage 10 seasons. I guess we'll never know. But he won the league title in all 5 of the seasons that he was in charge. He won 2 League Cups, 2 Scottish Cups, and he managed to get into the knockout round of the Champions League twice in his 5 seasons. So if Football Manager is to be believed, Kjetil Knutsen should be the next Celtic manager. Now, like I said earlier in the video, let me know in the comment section down below who you think should be and who you think will be the next Celtic manager. Also, let me know if you can think of any reason whatsoever why David Moyes and Ralph Hasenhüttl both decided to leave Celtic to go to Austria after just a season. I'm a bit flummoxed with that one. But that is it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel to get all my content when it comes out, hit the notification bell to stay notified, and I'll see you next time.